Grand Rising, everybody. This is Natalie coming to you live. Spirit and coffee. Got my cup here. Yum, yum, yum. Mm. So I'm trying to say Grand Rising instead of good morning because we're not really morning. What are we morning? Unless you're morning. If you're morning, then. So my friend Lisa, my yaya, is a good friend of mine. She's been on my Spirit and Coffee several times. She's like, Grand Rising, friend. Grand Rising, yeah. And I like that because it's like, oh, it makes you feel like you're waking up to this grand, beautiful day, right? Rather than good morning. Well, I'm not in morning, and to me, morning isn't good. It's not bad. Okay. Anyway, there's my rant to rave about that. So, grand rising to all of those who are on here. And just wanted to get started. So it's kind of funny because this morning, this grand rising, will we ever get out of it? No, I don't know. But this morning I was on Facebook and we're just chit chatting, of course. And me, I have to put my 2 cents in and really started to look at like words. And I've talked about words and I've talked about there's gematria, there's all these different ways to understand how words and vibrational tone came to be and why we utilize language, right? Well, it's to express what's happening internally, externally, to describe our senses, to describe what is going on in our world. That's typically what we use language for. It's tonality, it's vibrational frequency. Now, language itself is a construct. So if we looked at the letters, right, of the alphabet, that's really like the external depiction of what we see with our senses, what we feel, and all that. And it's us trying to describe sort of the story that we're seeing or what's unfolding in front of us or what we're viewing and we believe to be true, right? So, words and language, super, super important. Now, am I a stickler for it? Not always, but always, if that makes sense. And sometimes it gets the best of me in some ways. And the way that it does is that when people are speaking language, they don't really listen or know what they're saying, me included. So if I don't understand a word, if I don't know a word, I look up the etymology and I look up the definition. Those are the two things because words derived from something, they came from some place, and the way and the use of them is important. It's important. Why? Because there's a construct behind it. There's a reason that it was put together in this kind of symbolic meaning. Symbols have meaning. The symbols that we use or the characters that we use have a descriptive meaning, and they're trying to express something. And so the closer that we get to understanding how to express ourselves, the clearer that we become, the easier it is for us to manifest. And that's literally one of the keys to manifesting our reality. One of the keys to manifesting our reality is to understand the words that we use. Now, it's an inherent, something inherently comes out and we speak, right? We're talking. And this is a good way to sort of to listen, right? To sit there and listen to people and listen to their language. When you start to listen to their language, you sort of get a feel for their internal world and internal dialogue and their thought process. And you can almost do an analysis of how they live their life based on the words they use because words will shape and create the very existence that we live. I mean, this is not new wisdom or new knowledge, right? This is talked about in book after book after book. There's books and books and books written on this where people say look at language. And so this morning we had a really interesting dialogue, and the dialogue this morning was about the somebody had put a quote good morning on Facebook. And the quote that they put on, it wasn't a quote. They were just giving their insights to their words. And of course, people engaged in the conversation. And of course, people go back and forth. But what I did is I looked at what the person was trying to say. And I think things get misconstrued. And this is where people have difference of opinions. But if we go back to what the words are what kind of reality are they trying to shape? That's what you could look at. When I look at a word, what is the reality that I'm trying to shape? What is it that I'm trying to articulate? How am I trying to mold this reality or have this person understand the reality that I'm trying to shape around this word? Because that's what words do. They shape a reality. They shape a construct. They shape a mold. They create a container for us to exist in. They develop worldviews. They develop culture. That's what symbols do. They're part of the development of the world around us and how we engage it and how we express it. So really, really looking at that, look at your words, and I was having this other dialogue with a friend, right? We went to go have coffee and they started talking. I'm like, do people not really listen to the words that are being expressed and the actions that people take? If you pay attention to this, if you really watch, if you really observe, if you really listen and then watch, you can tell where people are not linking the two together. This is great discernment to have, not that people need to be perfect, right? But it also allows you to look at the people that you follow, the people that you're learning from, the people that you decide to have in your internal space. Do their words match their actions? And part of it could be that their words don't match their actions because they don't have the right words to describe what it is that they're trying to say. I used to have this issue when I was younger. And I realized that language is what was tripping me up. Good morning. Who's on here on Facebook? Say good morning, because I don't know who's on. And it doesn't not showing me. So I didn't have the words. Okay. I didn't have the correct words or language. In other words, so there's a distinction, right? Where they talk about the distinction between creditor, debtor language. One being a language of scarcity, the other one being a language of abundance. And there's certain distinctions and collapse distinctions that happen in language that cause people to speak, right, without even knowing that there is a collapse distinction in the word. Why is this important? It's important because language starts to shape the dialogue that we have with everybody when we communicate, right? So someone might say, well, I think that this is the etymology of the word, but really it's not. And a person who knows the true meaning of language or understands it will start to magnify to that other individual if it's being used correctly. So words literally will shape your reality. The symbology that we use, right, which is the dialogue, which is the words, which are the characters of the alphabet or whatever system you're using, are literally the characters that describe. And we can go to not hieroglyphics. Yeah, hieroglyphics. We can go back into like the ancient times when they were actually writing stuff on the walls, right? There was cuneiform text. There was all these pictures that they used. There were characters that they put together. Different languages had different systems. That's why we have people who live in a different sort of reality, it seems like, because their language is different and the way that they engage with the world and the way that they dialogue with the world and the characters that they use to sort of describe their perspective or their ideas show up differently. So what I do is I try to understand what exactly a person is trying to tell me. And sometimes it comes in the form of digging deeper into the individual, not because, see, and this was the whole thing, it was about curiosity and judgment. And from my perspective, it's only because I want to truly understand what the person is trying to convey. What are you trying to tell me? Right? Now, sometimes it comes off as judgment because people get very uncomfortable with questions. And again, if we looked back in history, right, they say curiosity killed the cat. Well, curiosity, why? Because when we start to dig deeper, we start to draw up the things that people don't want to look at internally. And they're almost forced, and I don't want to say forced, but kind of in a way to look at the things that may be uncomfortable in their life. But we know that when we do this, that we're able to move past and then sort of come into this illumination, right? When we go through the shadows, we come into the light. And so part of this is really important work, especially as a spiritual alchemist. This is what I do. Question, 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 question. And finally, when you understand, or when you come to the fullness of life, you understand there is no one answer. There is not one answer. There's not one answer for everything. There's all these different ways to look at it. And what that ends up becoming is a practice. It becomes an exercise, a practice, a way to engage the world from a different point of view, different perspective. But there's some level of understanding. And so looking at it from that perspective, saying, okay, what are the questions? So when I dialogue with somebody, right, and they're telling me stuff and I'm not understanding, or there's not clarity, I'm like, I'm not getting what they're trying to say. Or maybe I feel like they're not exactly articulating what it is the true experience is for them. I will ask them, well, do you mean this, or do you mean that? Or do you mean this, or do you mean that? Or what is it that, and then when there's clarity there, it's literally when you question and you open up that dialogue for questions, what ends up happening is they find some deep wisdom within themselves. You become the facilitator of that deep wisdom that lives within them. You don't give them answers and tell them who they are. They know who they are. It just facilitates an opening for the dialogue for them to say, oh, yeah, that's right. That's who I am. And then they remember, and then they open up their eyes and they start to go, oh, yes, that makes total sense. Okay, I get it. Cool. And then again, they thank you when you've done absolutely nothing. And then you say, it wasn't me, that was you. You did it. You have that wisdom within you. So we have the wisdom within us, right? We understand that the wisdom and these sacred gems live within us. We have them in us. Now, how to pull them out or extract those gems sometimes takes us looking at our language and going back and saying, okay, what words am I using? Or how am I describing this experience? Or how am I describing this particular thing? And it's funny because, you know, my family, they sort of make fun of me about this whole thing, about the language thing, right? My niece and I have this running joke about it because she was talking, I can't even remember, she would remember what she was talking about, what she was learning in her class, right? And and I don't know where this came from. It just like Freudian slipped right out. And I was like, yeah, but do you know the etymology of oppression? Or I don't know what it was. And I don't even know why I said it, to be honest with you. Perhaps it was a complex. Maybe she was talking about something and something just came up and I just went, whoop, and then it just came, the whole words just, they just came out. Okay. So, like word vomit. And then she was like, no. And I was like, oh. and, and then and then I think I told her, and then she was like, okay. And then I go, I don't know why I did, and I couldn't stop laughing about it, right? Because it was hilarious. But it's almost like, well, what are the words? What is the etymology? How do you go back? Let's go back to the beginning to see what did the word, what was it trying to shape and mold? What was the thing that it was trying to tell us? Because then it became this vocal vibrational frequency. Now words and vibration and tonality create as well. They create patterns. And in my kung fu class, right, my teacher, right, our master Abraham, what he says is he talks about how, Chinese, it's a very like up and down kind of tonality song. It sounds like a song type of language because the tones create some vibrational frequency. Now I want you guys to really look at when a drum, um, they've, and you guys have probably seen this. I'm almost positive that you've seen it, right? Where they put some dirt on a drum and then they play music and a different pattern starts to arise out of it, right? And we see all these fractal patterns, start to show up, these shapes and forms, and we're like, whoa, it's sacred geometry, right? And that sacred geometry is a pattern. And we can see these patterns in nature. So the tone, right? So first there was the word, the vibrational, the frequency, that frequency creates a pattern. The same with language and tonality. That's why we created language, right? It was a way to express the internal world and what we were seeing internally, and the synergy between the receiving the information from the external and then the internal dialogue that was sort of surfacing inside of us, that was coming out. And then we put vibrational tone behind it to create a language. That language creates something. The symbols that we write when we're writing create something. So good morning, Roberto. So for me, what I do is that I literally will look, like when I write something, I reread it a billion times and I'm like, wait, no, is this true? Does it ring true for me? And I'm like, no, this word is incorrect. This word is this word is that. That's not exactly the word that I want to use to describe this. And I'll go back and I'll fix it a billion trillion times. And the more that we start to write and understand words and language, the easier it is to articulate the internal world of who we are. Our authenticity starts to shine through. And we could be a little bit closer to who we are on the internal and express that because we have the language and the words that match. And then what we do, and the reason we become the authentic self, right, is because that expression on the external shows up. So what we say and what we do start to align. There's a match. See, people will say, I'm this way, and then they're going like that way. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just that they want to see themselves this way when really they're this way. So what it is having the awareness, right, in language that I'm saying I'm this, but really the language isn't right. I'm more this internally, and being and accepting and being honest with yourself. So sometimes it's being honest. Good morning, Nana. And honest with yourself and saying, oh man, I'm a total jerk. Oops. I've gotten feedback, and it's funny because I want to talk about knowing your ascending and your rising and all that in astrology. I think that's a pretty cool thing that I never really got involved in, which is interesting, being that I do this work. Most people are like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I don't do everything. Come on. I'm always learning something new. You can never stop learning. There's so much to learn. But again, getting closer to the authentic self, knowing who you are, and being honest in the dialogue. So when I was younger, I used to get a lot of feedback that basically I didn't have compassion, is what I was told. They were like, you are not compassionate. And I was like, really? I feel compassionate, but maybe it's not showing up as compassion. Like, do I even know what that means? And I'll tell you that I didn't really look into compassion until I got older. I started looking at the etymology of the word, breaking it down, trying to understand it. And I really started to understand it when the pandemic hit, right? Because I kind of understood compassion, but I thought compassion was like, oh, I love you. I understand. We share the same thing. And I mean, that was part of it. but to really look at the etymology of the word and understand it fully. What was the word compassion trying to tell me? And looking back and breaking the word down, which helped out a total ton. Sometimes it's hard to have that conversation with yourself, come to a reality moment. It's so true. It is. It's very hard to have that dialogue with yourself because people want to be seen as maybe perfect. You know what I mean? And it's hard to say, these are my flaws. This is, and it is because we don't want to be judged, or we don't want people to think that we're terrible people, because internally we're good, but we're good, but we have this thing going on. Good morning, Miss Bunnies. Good morning, Kizito, Jewel. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. um, so so again, they would say, well, you're not compassionate. So I started to look at the etymology of the word, right? And this happened totally when the pandemic happened and stuff. And I said, okay, let's look at compassion. We talk about the compassion of, the compassion of in Buddhism. And so I started to look it up, and it's come together, calm, like community together, calm, okay, pati, which was suffer. Together we suffer. And I started going, oh, well, maybe I wasn't called compassion because my suffering, right, was something that I felt like I could overcome suffering, right? I could feel, and some people don't maybe feel like they have the tools to really overcome their suffering. And so they're held in the chains of suffering, and they feel like they're held in the chains of suffering. And so I wasn't being relatable in that way. And that's why people were saying, well, you don't have very much compassion or empathy. And it's because perhaps I myself wasn't really viewing it from that perspective. And so understanding the word and saying, oh, yeah, together we suffer. Here's a relatable story. Here's, because I don't talk about the suffering, I'm always talking about overcoming the suffering. But what about the times when I was in suffering? Because we all experience it. Good morning, Emma. So when I started to dialogue about that, that's relatable. And that's the feedback I was getting. And I said, oh, okay. Yeah, I suffer. Here's my suffering. Here's what's happened to me. This is my past. And typically don't look to the past or talk about the past. So it seems like, oh, her life is great. She always has it together. Things fall apart though in my world. They're not always together, right? They fall apart too. I just put them back together. That's what I know how to do. I know how to recreate and restructure as things fall apart. But that doesn't mean that I don't suffer. And so to be relatable and to understand and to let people know that, yes, together we suffer. I do suffer too. But I wasn't saying that in the past. Why? Because the language, again, language shapes our reality. And then to understand what it means and to go back to the etymology of the word, literally, if you guys did this, if you just really listened to the words that you use, good morning, Rita, and really started to really dig deep into the words and listening to other people's words and not just saying, oh, yeah, 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 but really going like, that word just seems off a little bit. Let me go and look at the etymology of the word. Let me look at what is the connotation of the word? What does it really mean? What is it trying to drive? What energy is it driving? Because that energy then gets exuded on the external and it magnifies and draws in that energy. That's why they say language is important. Because there's a tonality, there's a reason that the word was shaped and molded in a specific way. And the distinction between the two opens up the dialogue to different ways of talking. Someone who really understands this stuff, when you open up that dialogue, you start to have different conversations. Different conversations become available to you. It's pretty interesting, to be quite honest. It really is. It opens up a whole new world, a whole new dialogue. It's kind of like if you thought about it from a university. So let's look at academia. If we looked at it, the words that I use as an undergrad are not going to be the same words I use as I climb the ladder, right, of academia. When you're talking to a professor, they're using a different dialogue. They could call it jargon, that those words were created specifically because what does it do? It opens up a dialogue for different ways of communication. Good morning, Fendi. A different way to communicate. And so you open up a dialogue for a whole different experience and a different set of individuals. You vibrationally call forth different individuals. That's why, because you're engaging in a new dialogue. So I'm really looking at words and language, and I'm like, interesting. Are you sure that's what you mean? Like the other day, this is a great example. Okay. Um, we were sitting at the table talking about the sensuality, sexuality, all that stuff, right? And then I really enjoy talking about that at this point in my life. And we're talking about the male energy, right? Um, so, um, so when we were talking about it, we were talking about, um, you know, the masculine energy, not just man. No, I'm not talking about gender, but yes, gender too. Okay, so no and yes, um, is that the masculine energy penetrates, right? And so the person was like, I don't know if I like the word penetrates, and I can't remember what was the word they used. Um, oh my God, what was the word? Okay, I can't remember the word. It's not coming to me at this particular time. But the word itself that they used, I felt had a negative connotation. Intrusive. That was the word. Well, they're intrusive. And I'm like, yeah, but intrusive feels like the other person doesn't have a say so. Intrusive sounds like I would just go and take, and that doesn't sound correct. So let's look at what the words mean, right? Look at and the separation and what is the difference, because you might end up with the same result, but the act on the other person's, right, the act of somebody else coming into your energy with permission, right, as opposed to just taking it away, there's a difference there. And the language itself opens up a different dialogue. Now, the word penetration might be a little uncomfortable for people. Okay. And then that makes sense. But if you understood the meaning of the word and how it's utilized, not just in sexual relations, but in anything, when someone penetrates your energy, right? We now have an ability to look at what do we want to penetrate our energy or not. Now, if someone's intrusive, they're just coming into your energy without your permission. But when we look at the word penetration, we can say, no, I choose not to. I set a boundary here. And if they cross that boundary, right, then that is violating your personal law. So the word itself isn't bad, but the way that we look at it, right? And it shapes a different reality for us. Language will shape a different reality for us. I promise you. You will have different conversations with different people. Another example, I was living in Durango, and most people, I just stay quiet when I meet most people. Believe it or not, I'm not just like chatty like this on Spirit and Coffee. Um, I'll be very quiet and I observe, and I quietly observe and listen to people. I start listening to their language and kind of, okay, listening, seeing, filling out. Well, these people were very highly spiritual people, and so they had, the language of spirituality and all that stuff. Okay. And then we were talking, and we were there to do some tarot readings and some Reiki stuff. And we're just gathering to do some healing work. There was a guy there, and the guy, was just kind of quiet, but he was kind of talking, not saying much. And he was saying a few things that I caught my attention. And I'm like, he was talking about symbols, as a matter of fact, symbology. And so I said, okay. So he said something and I was like, yeah, but what about this? And I was like, I don't know if that's the correct way. And then he started asking my opinion on something. And I was like, okay. And we started to talk. Before you know it, he goes and he's like, I have these coins that have these depictions on them, and I want you to see the symbols and tell me what you think and see if you can tell me what it means. And so he brings out all of these coins with all of these symbols, and I'm looking at them, and these are like copper. I don't know if they were copper, I can't remember, but he had got them specifically from an initiation of some sort, and I don't even know. Okay, it they were ancient old things, and and he said he had them, so he had all this stuff. So I started looking at the coins and I'm saying, yeah, I see this, but some of the symbols look like they were off, and I'm like, that's missing something, like this isn't. So for me it felt very dark, right? It felt like this dark thing. And then I kind of told him, and I was like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with, whatever. And I said, all right, cool, whatever. And I even took pictures of them, right, just because I wanted to, and he allowed me to. So he puts them away. And then, we end up having more dialogue. Okay. About the esoterics and deep, deep, deep esoteric work, not just the stuff that I do on Spirit and Coffee, but deep stuff. Okay. So we're talking about it. Then he puts his stuff away. And my friend comes up to me. She's like, how did you get him to do that? And I go, get him to do what exactly? I don't. She's like, he never talks to anybody. He never like brings out his stuff. Now, mind you, this guy, I believe, and you guys might freak out, I believe to be a reptilian person. Okay. I don't think he was trying to do whatever he was doing it felt dark. It felt like dark magic. Okay. That's what it felt like. And he started opening this and he shared so much with me. And I was like, whoa. Right. But my friend was like, how? And I said, well, it's just language. It's a specific language that when you open up the language, you start to dialogue in a different way. Okay. And the dialogue that you open up, right? The dialogue that you open up becomes this different vibrational frequency, but this is mastery in language, in understanding symbology and the words that we use. So what am I saying? I'm saying go and be very, 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 very mindful of the words you use and ask yourself if your words are aligning with your actions. Or if you have someone in your life, are their words aligning with their actions? Or if I'm following a spiritual practitioner, are their words aligning with their actions? Those are critical. Like I can't follow someone who doesn't align. I'm not saying they have to be perfect, but if they make a mistake, that they accept that and they say, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. I apologize. That's what I would do. So I'm asking, are these individuals that I'm following really speaking from a place of authenticity? Are they telling me, look, I don't ask for forgiveness? If they just straight up tell me, I'm like, well, thank you for being honest. I'd rather you be honest about who you are than to lie and then show up as somebody else. If you're like, I'm non forgiving, I hold grudges. Well, thank you. Now I know. Now I know if I want to play in your playground or not. I can determine that. And if I do and then something happens and you don't forgive me, well, there you go. See? Then I'm like, well, you told me. You straight up told me who you are. Listen, people will tell you who they are. Language, language, language. If you're trying to shape it, but you feel like you're off, like you're feeling like you're this way and people keep telling you that way, then maybe you ought to go do some self reflection. Get a little closer to who you are and accept it and own it. And sometimes it's hard. So there you go. Okay. So there you have it. Language creates, language is important. Please take a look at your own language, see if it matches up or not. And there you have it. Okay. So have a great day. And I will see y'all tomorrow. Bye.